Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into our daily quiz. Let's look into the first question. Which of the following are the literary works of Kalidasa? Abhignana Shakuntala, Mudra Rakshasa, Kumara Sambhava, Mrichakatika, Meghaduta. The answer to this is 1, 3 and 5 only. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference in this article. What are the literary works of Kalidasa? Kalidasa was one of the greatest poets who lived during the Gupta period. He was a classical Sanskrit writer and he has come up with number of great works as well. What are these works? It includes Abhignana Shakuntala, Vikramorvashi, Valavikagnimitra, the epic poems of Raghuvamsha, Kumara Sambhava and Meghaduta. These are some of the works that have been written by Kalidasa. There are other great poets as well. This includes Vishaka Datta. Vishaka Datta's work is Mudra Rakshasa, where Mudra Rakshasa means the ring of the demon and it recites the ascent of Chandragupta Maurya to the throne. Then we have Shudraka. He was himself a king as well as the writer and he has written three Sanskrit plays which includes Mrichakatika, Vinavasavadata, Padma Prabartika. These are the works of Shudraka. Kindly remember all these plays and literary works given by some of the great poets during that particular era. Now let's look into the next practice question. With reference to Solicitor General, which of the following statements are correct? Solicitor General's office and duties are governed by law officers, conditions of service rules 1987 and by constitution. He has the right to participate in the proceedings of parliament but not to vote. Which of the statements are correct? The answer to this is none. Why? That is because when you look into the first statement, Solicitor General's office and duties are governed only by the law officers conditions of service rules of 1987 and it is not by the constitution. The constitution does not mention about the office of the Solicitor General. Who is this Solicitor General? We have something called as the law officer for India. Who are these law officers? This includes the Attorney General of India. This includes the Solicitor General of India and we also have Additional Solicitor General for India. All the three people include or come under the law officer category. The Solicitor General is one of the officer who is subordinate to the Attorney General of India. When it comes to the rules that are present, we have one of the important rules called as law officers conditions for service rules of 1987. What is the Solicitor General? What is his job role? What he has to perform? What will be his duties is present under these rules and it is not present in the Constitution of India. Now when you look into the second statement, he has the right to participate in the proceedings of parliament but not to vote. This statement once again is wrong. Why? That is because the Attorney General of India would be able to participate in the proceedings of the Parliament, but that power is not given to the Solicitor General. In fact, he does not have the right to vote as well since he cannot participate. Even the Attorney General has the power to participate in the proceedings of the Parliament, but does not have the right to vote. But here, the Solicitor General cannot participate or he cannot also vote when it comes to the parliamentary proceedings. And when it comes to the terms of the office, a law officer will hold that particular office for about 3 years from the date when he enters the office. And he can also be reappointed by the government as well on the condition that he is ready to continue for the next 3 years. What we have to remember is that the Solicitor General can be reappointed by the government of India. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference in this article. Now let's look into the next practice question. Base erosion and profit shifting, sometimes seen in the news, refers to simplifying and harmonizing international customs procedures globally, anti-dumping measures, tax planning techniques employed by companies to exploit gaps in international and domestic tax laws, criminals using cryptocurrency for illegal activities. What does base erosion and profit sharing stands for? It stands for tax planning techniques employed by companies to exploit gaps in international and domestic tax laws. So, what is this base erosion? As the very name denotes, we have the tax base in every country. Every country has a plan that they would be able to get so much amount of money from a particular sector. So is with the corporate taxes, so is with the companies, so is with the direct taxes, so is with the indirect tax. So they will have an approximate decision or an idea what would be the money that they would be able to generate. But there are companies, multinational companies, which do not pay their taxes. Why? They identify the loopholes in a particular international tax laws and in the domestic tax laws, and ultimately shift their profits to some other country which has weak laws or which has less taxation that is imposed on these companies. So this particular company which is operating in one of the countries will not pay the taxes which it is rightly about to pay, but instead it shifts its profit or its taxation to some other country where the taxation is comparatively less. This particular topic has been explained in greater detail in one of our economy videos called as Global Minimum Corporate Tax. Kindly look into it. You will understand and get a clear picture of what is this base erosion and profit shifting and the global minimum corporate tax. Why have we taken this practice question? Because the article here makes a mention of the base erosion and profit shifting. Now let's look into the next practice question. Consider the following pairs. We have the lake on one side, the state it is present in on the other side. Vembanad Lake is in the state of Kerala, Indira Sagar Lake in Rajasthan, Pulicat Lake in the state of Andhra Pradesh. Which of the above pairs are correctly matched? The answer to this is 1 and 3 only. Why? That is because the Indira Sagar Lake is not present in the state of Rajasthan, but instead it is present in the state of Madhya Pradesh. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference to the Vembanad Lake. When you look into the important lakes of India, we have the Vembanad Lake, which is the longest lake in India, which happens to be the second largest Ramsar site in India, only after the Sundarban in the Western Bengal. And we also have Kumarakom Bird Sanctuary, which is also situated on the eastern bank of Vembanad Lake. Followed by this, we have the Chilika Lake in Odisha, Shivaji Sagar Lake in Maharashtra. Indira Sagar Lake is not in Rajasthan, but instead it is in Madhya Pradesh. Pongkong Lake in Ladakh, Pulicat Lake in Andhra Pradesh, Sardar Sarovar Lake in Gujarat, Nagarjun Sagar Lake in Telangana, Loktak Lake in Manipur, and Ular Lake in Jammu and Kashmir. All these have significantly been in use, and it is important that we also know the state that these lakes are present in, so that if it is asked in the preliminary, we would be in a much better position to understand. So where is this particular lake? It is in the state of Kerala, and as shown in this particular picture, it is this which is part of the Vembanad Lake. Now let's look into the next practice question. With reference to IFC Masala bonds, sometimes seen in the news, which of the statements given below are correct? The International Finance Corporation, which offers these bonds, is an arm of the World Bank. They are the rupee denominated bonds and are a source of debt financing for the public and private sector. Select the correct answer using the code given below. The answer to this is both 1 and 2. This happens to be a previous year question from the year 2016. What is this IFC Masala bond? When you speak about masala, masala is nothing but that which is associated with spices. This is a name which is given to those bonds which are Indian in nature, whereby Indian companies who want to raise money in the international market, not in the Indian market, but outside India, by giving rupee denominated bonds, that is what is called as IFC Masala bonds. So this IFC Masala bonds are the bonds issued outside India by an Indian entity in the Indian currency. So the money that is picked up can be used for the infrastructural development. So the major objectives of Masala bonds are to fund infrastructure project, ignite internal growth, and internationalize the Indian rupee. But Do remember, when it comes to these masala bonds, in case of any risk, it is the investor who has to bear the loss and it is not the borrower. Generally, it is the borrower who has to face the losses, but when it comes to these masala bonds, it is the investor who will bear the losses. The first masala bond were issued by the World Bank to fund the infrastructure project in India. The International Finance Corporation, the investment branch of the World Bank, issued a 10-year 10 billion Indian rupee bonds in 2014 to increase foreign investment in India and mobilize international market to support infrastructure developed in the country. There are certain rules and regulations which have been set up by the Reserve Bank of India regarding the masala bonds. What are these rules? Any corporate and Indian bank is eligible to issue rupee denominated bond overseas, so it can be a corporate body or it can also be an Indian bank which can ask for these money that can be raised overseas in another country by issuing these bonds. Money raised through these bonds cannot be invested in the real estate activities. So kindly remember, it cannot be used for any real estate activities or it cannot be used in the capital market. So the money that is given in the foreign market, when it is coming to India, this has to be used for the infrastructural development and cannot be invested in real estate businesses or it cannot be invested in the capital market. These are some of the important points from the preliminary examination point of view. Now let's look into the fact of the day. The fact of the day for today's discussion is FEMA. What does FEMA stand for? It stands for Foreign Exchange Management Act. What is this Foreign Exchange Management Act? Let us try to understand what is this act all about. Let's say you are a person who's traveling to United States of America. Why? It can be for any reasons. One, you want to visit a place so you can be a tourist, or you want to go there for education where you want to do your MS, or it can also be a business plan as well. In all these cases, what you require is dollars. In all these cases, what you require is rupee being converted into dollar so that you would be able to make transactions in United States of America. Or let's say, for example, there is one of the organizations or a company. It is involved in export or import business. So there is trade exchange that is happening between this particular company and another company based in some other country. For all of this, this company may have to pay another company in some other country, not in rupee, but it can be in dollar, or it can be in pound, or it can be in any foreign currency. So exchange regulation management is what is this Foreign Exchange Management Act. Basically, how much an individual would be able to exchange Indian rupee with the foreign money, how much of foreign exchange will be attributed to an individual, is what is this Foreign Exchange Management Act. So there will be restrictions that will be imposed by the government of India, and at the same time it is the Reserve Bank of India which would be able to formulate the laws so that a company or an individual would be able to regulate his foreign exchange. So when it comes to the foreign exchange, that is the money that is attributed to imports and exports, or what, for example, any other transaction, we had one of the laws called as the Foreign Exchange Regulation Act. This particular law was passed in the year 1973. But what exactly happened? After 1990, we open up the economy. So in the 1973, when the FERA was in picture, what we had is large amount of restrictions. Why? Because we basically believed that the foreign exchange was scarce in resource and this has to be conserved. We were not opening up our economy, and as a result of which, what we had is massive restrictions that were present in case of FERA. But in 1990, what we had is an open up of the economy. What we had is the LPG reforms that India took place, where we allowed foreign companies to also make investments as well. So what was once a scarce resource, what was once a conservative form of an act, became open, and ultimately, instead of conservation, we came to a particular word called as the management. So what are we doing right now? We are managing the foreign currency, which is where a new law was drafted that is called as the Foreign Exchange Management Act, which replaced FERA in the year 1999. So what are the differences? FERA was repealed in 1998 by Vajpayee government and FEMA succeeded FERA. When it comes to FERA, there were about 81 sections, and now when it comes to FEMA, we have about 49 sections. FERA was conceived with the notion that foreign exchange is a scarce resource, and FEMA was conceived with the notion that foreign exchange is an asset. The objective of FERA was conservation of foreign exchange. The objective of FEMA is management of foreign exchange. The definition of authorized person was very narrow when it comes to FERA. The definition of authorized person was widened when it comes to FEMA. Who is this authorized person? Any person who would be able to deal with foreign exchange. Let's say tomorrow I have to go to United States of America. As of now, I have about 10 lakhs. I go to a particular authorized person. I exchange rupee with the dollar so that I can spend this dollar in the United States of America. So the person who is given permission by the government of India and consent by the rules of the RBI, that person is called as authorized person. So who are these authorized persons? It was very myopic and narrow when it comes to FERA, and this was expanded when it comes to FEMA. Banking units did not come under the definition of authorized person. Now banking units also come under the definition of authorized person. Earlier it was not present, as we just discussed, but now we have new avenues, new people, new authorities, new persons being added into this particular definition. If there was a violation of FERA rules, then it was considered as a criminal offense. If there was a violation of FEMA rules, then it is considered as a civil offense. In the earlier one, it was assumed that this was a violation and they were booked under charges, and imprisonment was also imposed on such individuals who violated FERA. But when it comes to FEMA, this is treated as a civil offense. So a person committing this particular offense can pay a particular fine and ultimately move away from this particular issue or the controversy. A person accused of FERA violation was not provided legal help. A person accused of FEMA violation will be provided legal help. There was no provision for tribunal. The appeals went directly to the High Court. Under FERA, there is provision for special director appeals and special tribunal under the FEMA. These are the differences when it comes to FERA as well as FEMA. So do remember, when it comes to the Foreign Exchange Management Act, it is about regulating, it is about placing restrictions on an individual, on a banking system, so that this can ultimately ensure that there is transaction which is looked into by the government, and there are rules that are complied by the individuals and organizations, basically to help facilitate the external trade and payments while maintaining development and maintenance of foreign exchange market in India. It is this that we have to understand in reference to FEMA. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.